The courtroom was tense, heavy with the low hum of murmurs and the echo of shoes against marble floors. Wooden benches were packed with spectators hungry for entertainment rather than justice, their eyes fixed on the woman standing alone at the defendant's table. She was a black woman dressed simply, her posture straight, her expression calm. That calm irritated the man seated above everyone else. The judge leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smirk filled with authority and arrogance. A few lawyers leaned toward each other, whispering behind raised files, barely hiding amusement. Soft chuckles rippled through the gallery, growing bolder with every second. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, not to restore order, but to draw attention. His eyes swept over her slowly, mockingly, lingering on her clothes, her composed face, her steady gaze. He made a sarcastic remark about her confidence, questioning whether she truly understood where she was. Laughter followed, louder now, careless and cruel. She did not flinch. She did not argue. She simply stood there, hands folded, eyes forward, absorbing every insult in silence. To them, she was just another powerless defendant, someone to be rushed, ridiculed, and dismissed before lunch. No one questioned why she seemed unshaken or why her voice, when she spoke briefly, carried calm authority. The judge laughed again, convinced he was in control. Around him, the room agreed. If only they knew who was standing before them, and how quickly that laughter was about to die forever. The woman remained standing as the noise settled, her presence strangely steady in a room designed to intimidate. She wore a simple dark dress, no jewelry except a modest watch, her hair neatly pulled back. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention, yet something about her posture quietly commanded it. Her shoulders were relaxed, her chin level, her breathing slow and controlled. This was not the body language of someone afraid. To the court, however, assumptions came easily. Her clothes were mistaken for poverty, her silence for ignorance, her stillness for weakness. The judge and attorney saw a woman they believed had no power, no education, no influence beyond this room. She was treated as disposable, as if her presence were an inconvenience rather than a life standing in judgment. When she spoke, she did so softly, choosing each word with precision. There was no pleading in her voice, no nervous rush. She asked questions that were direct, legally sound, and unsettling in their clarity. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure why her calm responses felt heavier than shouting ever could. Her eyes moved deliberately, observing every reaction, every smirk, every interruption. The contrast was striking. While the courtroom treated her like someone small, she carried herself like someone who had stood in far greater rooms, faced far greater power. There was history behind her gaze, discipline behind her restraint, and purpose behind her silence. Something about her did not fit the role assigned to her, and though no one could name it yet, a quiet mystery followed her every word and breath. It lingered in the air, subtle but undeniable, hinting that this courtroom moment was merely a prelude to something far larger, far more powerful, and far more consequential than anyone present could possibly imagine in that very room. The judge had built his career on intimidation and applause, thriving on the unquestioned power of his bench. Years of praise had inflated his ego, and no one in his courtroom ever challenged him. He believed respect was demanded, not earned, and that the robe gave him permission to humiliate without consequence. Today, he seemed especially entertained. He leaned forward, laughing openly, tossing jokes about the woman's composure, her manner of speaking, even her decision to stand straight instead of bowing her head. Each remark drew louder laughter from the gallery. Some spectators laughed nervously, others eagerly, relieved they were not the target. The sound filled the room, turning justice into spectacle. The judge raised his hand theatrically, pretending to restore order while enjoying the attention. When the woman attempted to respond, he cut her off with sharp interruptions, correcting her words, twisting her meaning, refusing to let her finish a single sentence. He spoke over her again and again, his voice booming, hers deliberately silenced. It was power unchecked, authority misused, and bias barely disguised. The mockery carried an edge that went deeper than sarcasm, shaped by prejudice and entitlement. Her identity was reduced to a stereotype in his eyes, and he treated her accordingly. Through it all, the woman said nothing. She listened. She watched. Her eyes followed the judge's movements, the smirks of the lawyers, the shifting expressions in the room. Every insult, every interruption, every laugh was carefully absorbed. She did not lower her gaze or shrink back. Instead, she stood as still as stone, allowing the court to reveal its true character. In that silence, injustice spoke loudly, exposing racism and abuse of authority more clearly than any argument ever could. The moment stretched, uncomfortable and revealing, as truth waited patiently beneath their careless cruelty. The charge that brought her into that courtroom was small on paper, almost laughable when compared to the weight of the judge's reaction. She was accused of failing to comply with a minor administrative requirement, a technical violation that usually resulted in a warning or brief clarification. There was no allegation of harm, no victim, no intent, yet it had been escalated, dressed up as something far more serious than it ever deserved to be. From the moment her name appeared on the docket, the system seemed determined to fail her. Evidence that clearly supported her position had been brushed aside before the hearing even began. Documents were missing from the file, witness statements conveniently unavailable. Procedures that should have protected her rights were ignored without explanation. Each mistake leaned in one direction, and it was never in her favor. As the proceedings continued, it became obvious the judge had no interest in fairness. He rushed through details, waved off objections, and dismissed factual clarifications with a flick of his hand. His impatience wasn't subtle. He treated the case as an inconvenience, something to be finished quickly so he could move on. The bias was written into every interruption, every sarcastic remark, every refusal to slow down. Watching from the benches, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter gave way to discomfort. Some spectators frowned, sensing something deeply wrong. This was not justice. It was performance. Anger simmered quietly as people realized how easily a life could be pushed through a broken process without care or conscience. One question hung heavily in the air, unspoken but undeniable. If she was clearly intelligent, composed, and capable, why didn't she stop this sooner? Why did she allow the humiliation, the mockery, the rushed injustice to continue? No one knew the answer yet, but the calm in her eyes suggested there was a reason, and it was far more deliberate than anyone imagined. Her calm in the courtroom was born long before that day, shaped by years of struggle that began in childhood. She grew up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and expectations for girls like her were painfully low. From an early age, she learned what it meant to be overlooked. Teachers mispronounced her name, classmates questioned her intelligence, and authority figures treated her curiosity as defiance. Poverty made everything harder, from access to books to the simple belief that she belonged in spaces of learning. Racism and sexism followed her closely as she grew older. She was told, sometimes kindly and sometimes cruelly, that law was not a place for someone like her. When she spoke confidently, she was labeled arrogant. When she stayed quiet, she was dismissed as incapable. Every step forward felt like pushing against an invisible wall built by assumptions and prejudice. Still, she refused to bend. Education became her refuge and her weapon. She studied relentlessly, earning her place in classrooms where she was often the only black woman present. Even then, doubt surrounded her. Mentors questioned whether she could handle the pressure. Doors closed without explanation. Recommendations were withheld, and opportunities were quietly given to others who looked more acceptable. Each rejection carved something deeper into her resolve. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to observe how power moved, how systems protected some while crushing others. Law was no longer just a career. It became a mission. She saw clearly how injustice survived not through loud cruelty alone, but through quiet compliance. In moments of exhaustion, when giving up would have been easier, she made a promise to herself. She would not stand outside the system begging for fairness. She would rise within it, understand it, and one day hold it accountable. That vow guided every choice she made, shaping the woman now standing silently in that courtroom, fully aware that this moment was not happening to her, but for a reason far greater than anyone there could yet comprehend. When she spoke again, it wasn't loud, and it wasn't emotional. It was calm, steady, and deliberate, the kind of voice that didn't ask for permission to be heard. She addressed the court with controlled confidence, choosing her words carefully, as if each one had been measured long before she ever stepped into that room. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Her sentences were clean, structured, and unmistakably precise. She referenced the case details with ease, pointing out procedural oversights and legal inconsistencies without accusation or anger. Each statement landed firmly, exposing gaps that had been ignored moments earlier. The tone of the room began to change. The scattered whispers stopped. A few spectators leaned forward, curiosity replacing amusement. The laughter that once echoed now felt out of place, even embarrassing. The judge's expression hardened. He shifted in his chair, irritation flashing across his face. He interrupted once, then twice, but her composure didn't break. She paused politely, then continued, unfazed. This wasn't defiance. It was authority wrapped in restraint. He wasn't worried yet, but something about her confidence unsettled him. Near the clerk's desk, a subtle reaction went unnoticed by most. The clerk glanced down at the documents, then back at the woman, brow furrowing. A lawyer in the front row stiffened slightly. Recognizing the language she used, the level of detail she commanded, this was not how ordinary defendants spoke. Something felt off, unfamiliar, and quietly alarming. The courtroom had shifted from spectacle to tension. No one could explain why, but they could feel it. The balance of power, once firmly tilted, had begun to move, slowly and unmistakably, in a direction no one had anticipated. As she continued, her words grew more revealing, though she never raised her voice. She cited legal precedents with effortless precision, cases buried deep in judicial history that most practicing attorneys rarely mention aloud. The names, the years, the outcomes flowed naturally, as if they were part of her daily vocabulary rather than something hurriedly memorized. A few lawyers exchanged glances, caught off guard by the depth of her knowledge. She went further, referencing specific rulings that shaped constitutional interpretation, decisions typically discussed behind closed doors by senior judges and legal scholars. The prosecutor froze mid-note, pen hovering above paper. Confusion flickered across his face as he searched his memory, unsure whether he had misunderstood her or underestimated her. He hesitated before responding, a rare pause that drew attention. The atmosphere in the courtroom tightened. The laughter that once filled the room vanished completely, replaced by an uneasy silence. Spectators shifted in their seats, suddenly aware that something was unfolding beyond their understanding. What had seemed like a routine case now felt like unfamiliar territory. The judge's control began to slip. He interrupted more sharply, his tone less playful and more defensive. His questions sounded rushed, almost careless, as if he were trying to regain authority rather than seek clarity. He tapped his gavel harder than necessary, his movements betraying frustration. Every sentence she spoke added weight to the discomfort in the room. She wasn't just defending herself. She was navigating the law with a confidence that suggested experience far beyond that of an ordinary defendant. No one dared say it aloud, but the realization crept in quietly. The woman standing before them was not who they thought she was, and the courtroom was no longer laughing. She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to settle over the room. Then she straightened slightly and spoke with a calm that felt heavier than any shout. She stated her full name, slowly, clearly, and the way she did made several heads lift. The judge scoffed at first, ready with another interruption, until she continued and said the words no one expected to hear. She informed the court that she was a sitting justice of the Supreme Court, present not as a defendant seeking mercy, but as a citizen witnessing the system at work. For a brief second, no one moved. Then she reached into her folder and placed official credentials on the desk, turning them so the seal was unmistakable. The clerk leaned forward, eyes widening. A lawyer inhaled sharply, recognizing the name printed in bold. Silence crashed down like a wall. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Every spectator froze, mouths slightly open, laughter erased as if it had never existed. The judge's face drained of color. His confident posture collapsed into rigid stillness. Hands gripping the edge of the bench as reality caught up with him. Moments earlier, he had mocked her. Now he couldn't find his voice. The power dynamic flipped, so suddenly it felt unreal. Whispers dared not rise. No gavel struck. The courtroom, once loud and cruel, stood perfectly still, bearing witness to the truth it had refused to see. This was the peak of humiliation, revelation, and justice colliding in a single breath, and everyone present knew they would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Time seemed to stop as understanding settled in every corner of the room, leaving only shame, awe, and irreversible consequences hanging heavily over the stunned court, forever changed by the truth revealed. The judge opened his mouth, intending to regain control, but no words came out. He stammered, repeated himself, and finally let out a sharp, awkward laugh that sounded hollow even to him. His usual confidence had evaporated in an instant, replaced by disbelief and panic. Every gesture, every demand for order, now seemed absurd, meaningless in the face of what had just been revealed. The courtroom that had once hung on his every word now ignored him entirely, eyes fixed instead on the woman who had shattered his facade. Court staff exchanged nervous glances. The clerks shuffled papers too quickly, unsure whether to intervene or simply wait for instructions that would never come. Lawyers shifted uneasily in their seats, and a few spectators murmured softly, sensing the complete reversal of power. The judge's authority, built over decades, crumbled in mere seconds. Each laugh he had shared at her expense now echoed back at him, sharp and biting, leaving him exposed and humiliated. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that nothing could undo the damage. His reputation, meticulously cultivated over years, was in ruins. Colleagues who had once admired him would now question his judgment, his temperament, his very integrity. The realization hit him fully. His career, the very thing that had defined his life, was effectively over. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be completely stripped of control. The humiliation that had been his tool was now the weapon pointed at him, and there was no escape from the consequences he had long thought only others deserved. The courtroom remained silent for a moment longer before the clerk finally spoke, confirming what everyone had already sensed. The case against her was immediately dismissed. All charges were dropped, erased from the docket as if they had never existed. Relief rippled through the room, but it was tempered by the gravity of what had just occurred. Justice had been restored, not through compromise, but through truth revealed at the perfect moment. Almost immediately, an official announcement declared that the judge would be investigated for his conduct during the trial. Complaints about bias, harassment, and repeated abuse of authority were suddenly taken seriously, no longer ignored as routine courtroom noise. Colleagues who had once turned a blind eye now had confronted the extent of his misconduct, and records that had long been buried or overlooked began to surface. Patterns of favoritism, inappropriate remarks, and manipulations of the law emerged, painting a picture of systemic abuse that could no longer be hidden. Outside the courthouse, the media caught fire. Headlines screamed with shock and disbelief, capturing the reversal of fortune, the humiliation of the judge, and the triumph of the woman who had been underestimated. Social media erupted, debates flared, and people across the country weighed in. Public opinion, once irrelevant, now amplified accountability. For once, the system worked as it was meant to. The judge, who had laughed and mocked, faced scrutiny that would define the end of his career. And the woman who had been wronged was no longer merely a defendant. She had become a symbol of integrity, resilience, and the power of truth, ensuring that the law, finally, held the arrogant accountable. She turned slowly, her eyes sweeping over the courtroom one last time, calm and unwavering. Her voice, though soft, carried weight, each word measured and deliberate. "Dignity is not granted by titles or robes," she began, "and equality cannot be demanded only when convenient. Justice is not a performance. It is a responsibility we all share." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in, watching the judge shrink into his chair, powerless and exposed. "Too often, people suffer silently," she continued, her tone neither angry nor accusatory, but full of quiet authority. "They are dismissed, overlooked, or ridiculed, and the world moves on as if nothing happened. Today was a reminder that those who appear powerless are not always so. Strength can be quiet, resilience can be unseen, and truth can overturn even the highest walls of arrogance." Her gaze softened, scanning the spectators and staff, ensuring they understood the deeper lesson beyond the courtroom drama. Without a hint of arrogance, she gathered her belongings and walked toward the exit, each step deliberate and confident. The audience, moved by her poise and insight, felt a mixture of awe and inspiration. They had witnessed not just a revelation, but a lesson in courage, dignity, and unwavering strength that would linger in their minds long after the doors closed. The events of that courtroom left a mark far deeper than any single trial ever could. Prejudice, once subtle and masked by laughter, had been exposed in its rawest form, revealing how easily assumptions and appearances can mislead even the most educated, the most confident, and the most powerful. Power, wielded without humility, can crush lives in seconds, yet true authority is quieter, steadier, and demands neither applause nor fear. The woman's presence, calm and unwavering, reminded everyone that strength does not need to be loud to be undeniable. Judging someone by their appearance, by their silence, or by the simplicity of their attire is a mistake that can blind a room, a courtroom, or an entire system. True influence comes not from mockery or spectacle, but from knowledge, preparation, and the courage to remain composed in the face of arrogance. She had demonstrated that real power can wait, observe, and strike precisely when it is most necessary, leaving a lesson in dignity and restraint that echoed louder than any insult ever could. In the end, the courtroom learned an unforgettable truth. Authority is not shown through domination or ridicule. It is proven through patience, wisdom, and unwavering integrity. And sometimes, the quietest voice carries the heaviest justice.